The Assembly Committee on Government Affairs will come to order. Madam Secretary, please call roll.
Assemblywoman Anderson.
Present.
Assemblywoman Black.
Here.
Assemblywoman Brown May.
Here.
Assemblywoman Considine.
Present.
Assemblywoman Dickman.
Here.
Assemblywoman Duran.
Here.
Assemblyman Ellison.
Present.
I have this one here.
Assemblywoman Martinez.
Present.
Assemblyman Matthews.
Here.
Assemblyman MacArthur.
Here.
Assemblywoman Thomas.
Here.
Assemblywoman Torres. Chair Flores.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mark Vice Chair Torres as present as she makes her way back into the meeting at a later time today. We have a quorum. Good morning, members. I hope everybody's doing well. This morning we have two bills that we're going to be going over. We're going to take the agenda in the order it appears, starting with Assembly Bill 143, followed by Assembly Bill 153, and then we'll do public comment. I want to remind you to please keep your microphones on mute unless you are speaking. Keep your cameras on unless you have something you have to address. Feel free to turn it off. Just give me a heads up, please. For those of you following us virtually, thank you for joining our meeting this morning. We look forward for your engagement and conversation. I want to remind people to please limit their remarks, whether they be in support or opposition, to 2 minutes. And I want to remind you to please keep your remarks during the hearing. If unfortunately you needed to say something different, public comment is not the time to do that. It's during the bill presentation itself. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and open up the hearing on Assembly Bill 143. I believe our Assemblywoman Krasner is here. Good morning, welcome, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Good morning, Chair Flores and members of the committee. I am Nevada State Assemblywoman Lisa Krasner, representing Assembly District 26. Today, I am here to present Assembly Bill 143, which establishes provisions concerning victims of human trafficking. As I walk you through the bill, please refer to the amendment posted on Nellis, not the original bill, because we are proposing several changes. Some background information. Human trafficking has been described as a form of modern-day slavery, impacting our most vulnerable populations. And it is a serious problem in Nevada that warrants the full attention of state government. Sex trafficking is a brutal, complex, and widespread crime in which children are used in commercial sex and adults are targeted through force, fraud, and coercion to engage in activity against their will. A research brief published by UNLV showed that Nevada was tied for 9th place in the nation for human trafficking cases reported in 2017. And recently, the FBI and United States Attorney's Office announced that more human trafficking cases were filed in Nevada in 2020 than in any previous year. This shows that despite recent efforts to address the issue, more needs to be done. Human trafficking comes in many forms and includes involuntary servitude, an individual assuming rights of ownership over another person, pandering, sex trafficking, and forced labor. The most common form of trafficking in Nevada is sex trafficking at 89%, which is significantly higher than the national average of 70%. Assembly Bill 143 will help victims of human trafficking in a more efficient and direct manner by empowering the Division of Child and Family Services in the Nevada Department of Health and Human Services to develop a statewide plan in cooperation with the Nevada Attorney General's Office. More attention will be given to helping victims of human trafficking and providing them with the resources that they need. In addition to the development of a statewide plan, AB 143 will also be required to form a statewide task force on human trafficking. The statewide task force on human trafficking will consist of interested parties and stakeholders to assist the division in carrying out its duties. The statewide task force will allow stakeholders to communicate, collaborate, and coordinate their efforts. Additionally, the amended version requires DCFS to designate a human trafficking specialist inside the Nevada Victims of Crime Compensation Program and to maintain an online directory of services for victims of human trafficking. The amendment also makes the provisions of the plan detailed in the bill discretionary instead of required, which will remove the fiscal note entirely placed on the original version of the bill. So there's a zero fiscal note with the amendment. The goal of the statewide plan will be to address the delivery of services to victims of human trafficking and may include the identification of victims of human trafficking, assisting victims of human trafficking to access governmental benefits and services to which they may be entitled, resources for victims of human trafficking, including medical, psychological, housing, education, job training, childcare, victims' compensation, legal and other services for victims of human trafficking. Developing strategies to increase awareness of human trafficking and the services available to victims. The establishment and maintenance of community-based services for victims of human trafficking, and assistance to victims of human trafficking with family reunification or to return to their place of origin if they would like to. Finally, the bill requires the administrator of DCFS to periodically review the statewide plan to ensure that it complies with the provisions of the bill. In conclusion, Chair Flores and committee members, this is my conclusion of my presentation. I urge your support of AB 143, which will improve the lives of human trafficking victims and raise awareness of the issue of human trafficking in our state. I am happy to answer any questions you may have, and I thank you for allowing me this time to present my bill before you.
And thank you, Assemblywoman. I know that you've been working rigorously on getting rid of that fiscal note, which I think everyone's doing this session. So I appreciate you doing all that work. At this time, I'd like to open it up for questions. And we'll start off with Assemblyman Ellison.
Oh, Chair?
Yes.
Chair Flores?
Yes, Assemblywoman?
I have a co-presenter, James Dold. May he present prior to the questions, because I believe that his testimony may help with committee members' understanding of the bill.
No problem.
Thank you.
Through that lane, Assemblyman Ellison, we'll have you go first after the co-presenter does his remark. Good morning and welcome.
Great, thank you so much. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to speak before your committee today. I also want to thank Assemblywoman Krasner for her leadership in championing this very important piece of legislation to help human trafficking victims throughout the state of Nevada. As background, my name is James Dold. I'm the CEO and founder of Human Rights for Kids, a 501c3 based nonprofit organization in Washington, D.C. I'm also a board member of Survivor Alliance, an anti-trafficking organization that works to elevate the voices and experiences of human trafficking survivors around the world. At Human Rights for Kids, we are working to promote and protect the human rights of children across the United States in a variety of different settings, in the educational space, in juvenile justice, and in child welfare. I come to this work from a very unique perspective. I actually grew up in Las Vegas. I am a proud alumni of John S. Park Elementary School, John C. Fremont Middle School, and the Advanced Technologies Academy High School. I also graduated from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. I'm a first-generation college graduate. The trajectory of my career really began when I was a child growing up in Las Vegas. Unfortunately, I grew up in the inner city, as some might surmise from some of the schools that I went to. And I was early on in my life a victim of child sexual abuse, which later exposed me to a child predator in my early teenage years. And when I was 13 years old, I was in the Boy Scouts of America, which was connected at that time to Christian Life Community, which was a church, for those that are familiar, in Commercial Center, right off of Sahara Avenue and Maryland Parkway. And I attended right after my 7th grade year in high school. I was at a Boy Scout fundraiser function when I met a family of a Cub Scout in my Boy Scout troop. And like a lot of skilled child predators, the mother actually of the Cub Scout took a particular interest in me. And as a kid from the inner city who didn't have a whole lot, who was dealing with trauma from early childhood abuse, where I didn't feel like I was getting the support that I needed from my family, it made it very easy for a skilled child predator to work their way into my life. And it started off relatively innocuous, right? It started off in a way where she was taking me out to fast food restaurants and taking me to concerts and building the trust and confidence that so many of predators do when they're targeting young children. And that really helped build that level of trust for me, where I began to open up about my earlier childhood experiences of being a victim of child sexual abuse when I was 5 years old, and the resentment and anger that I harbored toward my parents for not doing what I thought they should be doing in response to that particular situation. And so the situation began to evolve and escalate from one of what I thought was seemingly a concerned adult to an adult who began to sexually abuse me. It started off sort of physical touching. It then escalated from there to more extreme forms of sexual abuse, to eventually statutory rape. And so from the end of my 7th grade year through my 8th grade year in middle school, I was essentially leaving school every day, going to this family's house where this woman was engaged in these various forms of sexual abuse of me. And as a kid, as a 13, 14-year-old boy, it was something that, to be quite honest and frank, I thought that I wanted. I thought that's, here was this person who, seemingly cared for me, seemingly loved me. I was getting affection and attention that I wasn't getting at home. And I thought that this was a person that I actually loved. And like a lot of cycles of violence, it began to deteriorate from there, where this person started to engage in physical and emotional abuse of me. And that in turn, in addition to the sexual abuse, created what's known as a traumatic bond. I had this bond with my abuser where I felt that every time she was angry with me, or she was, physically violent with me or emotionally abusive to me, that it was somehow my fault as a 13, 14-year-old boy. And I was then in this position where I was willing to do anything to get back into her graces. Eventually, I eventually ended up running away from my home. I moved in with this other family, with her family, where I continued to endure the physical and sexual abuse as well as the emotional abuse. And after a while, the traumatic bond that I had formed was then used as a way to get me to do anything that she really wanted me to do. And that included essentially becoming a domestic servant. So like I said, I was coming home from school every day, going directly to this house where I now lived. And I was taking care of children. I was performing household chores such as, cleaning the kitchen, living room, bedrooms. I was cooking, cleaning. I was essentially the servant to this family and their children at a time when, as a boy, I should have been out, playing football or chasing girls my age or doing a whole host of other things that children usually engage in around that time. But instead, my childhood was being stolen from me, and I was victim of what we know today as modern day slavery. And that was my life for 2 years. I endured in that situation from my 8th grade year in middle school until about midway through my junior year, or excuse me, my sophomore year in high school. A number of factors led to me being able to eventually break the traumatic bond that I had with my abuser, but it was a very long and arduous process. It's very hard to explain the impact that traumatic bonding has on children, except to say it's the most severe form of dysfunctional attachment that you could ever have to a person. It's oftentimes referred to in cases of domestic violence or exploitative cults. And people often ask, well, why didn't you leave? And it's for many victims, especially child victims in these situations, you feel like you can't leave. And this issue of traumatic bonding, particularly for children, is what's used in both labor and sex trafficking contexts all the time. Traffickers are very skilled at getting into, what is known as the DNA of the child by developing this cycle of violence and this traumatic bond, which then, essentially is the psychological hold that they have over the child, where they're willing to do anything, which was the case for me. And so thankfully, because of mentors in my life and high school coaches in football and wrestling, I was eventually able to break free of that hold, move back in with my family, and go on to graduate from high school as the only person who was raised by my parents to finish high school in the community where we lived. But I never forgot those experiences. And after I finished law school at the University of Maryland, I started working at an anti-human trafficking organization called Polaris Project. And that's where I first came in contact with Assemblyman Hambrick and began working with various members of the Nevada Legislature to combat human trafficking. And I'm proud to say that in 2013, I worked with Assemblyman Horn, who I know is a lobbyist up there now, but back then he was the majority leader. And he sponsored legislation, AB 146, which criminalized what happened to me as a child. It's known as the involuntary servitude of a child trafficking statute. And, it was important because it was validation for me for what had happened to me. Unfortunately, by the time that I reported the crime to law enforcement, I was 27 years old. The statute of limitations at that time had passed. And so there was no way for me to get any sort of recourse. And so by working with Assemblyman Horn, I was able to, work with law enforcement, and at that time, the Attorney General, who is now Senator Catherine Cortez Masto, on a complete anti-human trafficking framework, including AB 146. And so, as we continued to work to create an anti-human trafficking framework there in Nevada, one of the glaring pieces of that framework that was missing was this bill that is before you today, AB 143. I can't tell you how important it is to have a plan in place for the delivery of services and the identification of trafficking survivors. Oftentimes what we see is that survivors are unwilling to both come forward, but also to cooperate in law enforcement investigations, because in a lot of cases, it has been instilled in them. They've been brainwashed to believe that law enforcement is the enemy, that they'll be looked at as a common criminal, that, some of them oftentimes have convictions on their record. Sometimes they're prostitution related, sometimes they're for other nonviolent crimes such as drug possession and the like. Somebody else who was very close to me growing up, she was an adult survivor of sex trafficking. Her boyfriend brainwashed her, was a domestic violence abuser, used her drug addiction, which was she had an addiction to heroin, to control her and to force her into prostitution in northern Nevada, in Reno, actually. And she was eventually arrested for possession of stolen property related to what he was forcing her to do, which was pawn stolen goods. And, even though there was a sense that she was a victim, she wasn't provided with the services that she needed. And so she never ended up, coming forward about her experiences specifically with him as a sex trafficking survivor. She spent 6 years in jail for the charges that she was facing. And I use that as an anecdote to explain to you what it's like for a lot of trafficking survivors who are coming out of these situations where the traumatic bond that we have is just so intense. There's this brainwashing that's happened, and these are particularly acute for children who, are not experienced in the world, who are still struggling to figure out what it is they've gone through in their life. And for a lot of us who are dealing with those sorts of issues, whether it's the traumatic bond, mental health issues, or if it's a drug addiction like the person that I mentioned before, it is absolutely imperative that there is a plan in place when they are identified for the delivery of services, for everything from addiction counseling to mental health to healthcare to housing to legal assistance. Because by creating that framework of victim service, by having a victim services plan that puts into place a protocol for how to get victim services, or at least tell them what services are available to them, we are increasing the likelihood that that trust between the victim and law enforcement will be created, and that they will be able to participate meaningfully in the prosecution of their traffickers. A great example of this, just as another anecdote, there was a study that was done by the Arizona State University with Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department that found between 2011 and 2019, there were approximately 833 cases of child sex trafficking, 70% of which never proceeded to trial. And this article can be found on the Las Vegas Review Journal, where they detail this. But one of the reasons for this is, again, everything that I mentioned about how difficult it is for children to come forward, all of the complexities of the trauma that survivors are dealing with. So for us to be able to really combat human trafficking, two things are absolutely essential. One is this victim services plan to help victims recover from their situation, rebuild their lives, which is going to increase the likelihood that they'll be in a position to help prosecute their traffickers. And number two, having a statewide task force in place that helps build a collaboration between law enforcement agencies, nonprofit, governmental organizations, and victim services providers. So having that wraparound services and having everything in place is going to put Nevada in a position to more effectively combat this crime. And so I'll close out my testimony, and I'll be happy to take any questions from Mr. Chair or the members of the committee. But I just want to say, this legislation is so important to sending an unmistakable message to victims of trafficking throughout the state that we see you, we hear you, we care for you, and we are here for you. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would urge this committee's favorable support of House Assembly Bill 143. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I go to the members, and I'm probably going to say something you hear often, sir, but I just wanted to say thank you for allowing your story to be one. I apologize. I just realized I was on mute. I was just saying that before I went to the members, I wanted to say thank you, sir. You probably hear this often, but I think it's important that we repeat it, just how important your story is. And thank you for allowing that to be one to empower other humans going through these problems and trying to help other humans. I think at times we've all been through difficult things, and sometimes we use that as a catapult to fight and really empower other humans. So I just wanted to say thank you for your strength and bringing such an important topic to this committee and helping the Assemblywoman. I'm confident that we'll be able to achieve something together. With that, I'd like to first go to Assemblyman Ellison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, I really enjoyed the presentation because there's a lot of it out there. I was on several conference calls with the AG's office when they did some of the sex trafficking, what they were trying to do in the state of Nevada. And the trucker stepped up to the plate at that time and helped a lot of people, be the watchdogs out there, and it worked out wonderful how it worked, and it was amazing that they could actually save some of these people. And if anybody ever gets a few moments, there's a movie that come out about 2 years ago, and I've got it if they want to watch it. It's called 8 Days, and it's a true story about a girl that was kidnapped, put into sex trafficking, and the mother would not let up even when some of the other people would. And they finally got her out of there. So this is happening every day. And this was a young high school girl. So it's a great movie. But one of the questions I do have, when I went through this bill originally, before I got the new mock-up, the fiscal note was really high and what I thought would be. So I'd like to know how Ms. Krasner got this worked out to where she could get this thing done and be able to move this bill forward. Because I think it's a great bill. The biggest thing is some of the stuff in there, the financial part that she's got out of there. I'd like to know how she got it done. Maybe we could all learn from it.
Chair Flores, through you to Assemblyman Ellison. Thank you for your question, Assemblyman Ellison. I worked in conjunction with the Nevada Attorney General's office and Ross Armstrong from the Department of Child and Family Services under the Department of Health and Human Services on the amendment. And if you look at the amendment that's posted on Nellis, you'll see that the language changed from mandatory language to permissive language. And so with that permissive language, the fiscal note was removed by the Department of Health and Human Services to Department of Child and Family Services.
Bill, good job.
Thank you.
Next, we can go to
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you, Assemblyman. Next, if we can go to Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you. And I just wanted to echo Chair Flores's thank you to Mr. Dold for being vulnerable with us and sharing your story so others can grow from it. And also thank you, Assemblymember Krasner. I know that this is something you've been working on for many years. So I do have two questions. The first has to do with just an understanding, making sure I'm understanding correctly, that the task force has been removed from the bill. Is that correct? Or the task force is still in place and planned in the current budget system? I think that's where I'm kind of confused by one element.
Chair Flores, through you to Assemblywoman Anderson. Posted on Nellis is the amended version of the bill, which does show that the fiscal note has been removed and it's to zero. But currently here in Nevada, we have regional human trafficking task force. We have a regional task force on human trafficking in the north, and we have a regional human trafficking task force in the south. However, we do not have a statewide plan or a statewide human trafficking task force. And a statewide task force will allow those regional groups to communicate, coordinate, and cooperate their efforts and their services on a statewide level to victims of human trafficking.
Great. Thank you so much. I just needed that clarification, make sure I understood it. And then my other question had to do with the term periodic review. I don't know if that's a yearly review or if that's more in conjunction with the legislative sessions. And also with that review, will there be any sort of report or any sort of documentation about necessary changes or how some of these ideas have been brought forward and how they are being utilized or how they might be more of an opportunity for change? So I guess it's more about that term periodical.
Okay.
Reviews, and then also how that review will be utilized.
Sure. Chair Flores, through you to Assemblywoman Anderson. When we crafted the amendment to the bill, again, as I said, I worked together with the Nevada Attorney General's office and the Department of Health and Human Services, Ross Armstrong. What we came up with is whenever you mandate something, there's going to be a fiscal note. And because of COVID-19, our state is in a budget crisis. So in an effort to get to a zero fiscal note, we made things permissive and we left them open. So the Department of Child and Family Services, in conjunction with the statewide human trafficking task force and the Nevada Attorney General's office, will make the decisions on how they want the task force to run, who they want to be the members. If they want the existing members of the regional task force in the north and the regional task force from the south to be the members, and we want them with their institutional knowledge and many, many years of work in human trafficking to be the people on the task force, and for them to choose other people who are interested parties and stakeholders and have knowledge about human trafficking issues, then those should be the people that are on it. If they want to meet twice a year, if they want to meet quarterly, I want that to be left up to them. While I've been working on the issue of human trafficking for many years, there are people in this state that have been working on it for a much longer time than me. And so I don't want to direct them how to set up a task force. I would rather I'm creating the vehicle, we are creating the vehicle for them to implement and put the task force together in a way that they think is best. Of course, using the federal guidelines in an effort to, as I said, communicate, cooperate, and coordinate their efforts on a statewide basis for the victims of human trafficking.
So thank you for that clarification on who the members would be and their role and everything. And I believe I'm going to make a connection then that periodical review will also be based upon that expertise from the task force that is, if I'm making that connection correctly. And I'm seeing
Yes,
you.
that's correct.
Okay. Thank you so much. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Next, we'll go to Assemblywoman Thomas.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. I appreciate this time for me to engage in this, I don't know how to put this, AB 143. My heart just leaps. I have two questions. One is to Assemblywoman Krasner. Thank you for presenting this bill. And for Mr. Dole, thank you so much for sharing your story. My first question is, I would like to be a co-sponsor of AB 143 with your permission.
Yes, of course, Assemblywoman Thomas.
So much. And my second question is, I know that you've been working on this for quite some time, as you've already stated, but I do have a question, and it is in section 1, subsection 2A, the identification of victims of human trafficking. I just want to know, actually, how did you come about that, and why would you want to have their identification known? I'm looking at the confidentiality. I want them to be able to come and speak clearly. Mr. Dole, his whole presentation was just riveting, and we can make a movie out of that because it was just told a story from point A to point B. And he wasn't afraid to tell his story, but at 13, my concern is those victims of trafficking, how they would feel about people knowing who they are.
Chair Flores, if I may respond through you to Assemblywoman Thomas. So the identification of human trafficking victims listed in the bill is not identifying them to the whole world. It's educating law enforcement on how to identify human trafficking victims. I was speaking to a law enforcement officer just a couple of days ago, and they said that they do receive some training on this because it's such a big problem in the state of Nevada. But the women will not make eye contact with law enforcement officers. They will pretend that they are maybe the girlfriend of the pimp or abuser because they are so afraid that if they were identified by law enforcement, that law enforcement would try to help them. And if they ever got back out, their pimp or abuser would be there to beat them up. There's a lot of violence in this crime. So it's for law enforcement to learn how to identify victims of human trafficking, not for us to identify them to the whole world. I'm very conscientious about our victims of human trafficking. I would never agree to anything that would put them in a position like that.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And thank you. Next, we'll go to Assemblywoman Considine, followed by Vice Chair, and then followed by Assemblywoman Black. Assemblywoman Considine, please.
Thank you, Chair Flores, and thank you, Assemblywoman Krasner and Mr. Dold for bringing this bill and for testifying on it and for bringing this up to the attention of everyone who can see this and making change in the future. My semi-question might have already been answered through your conversation with Assemblywoman Anderson. I noticed through the bill that the term victim is the word that is used, and Mr. Dold used survivor. And I know that although these are victims, that as they move through the process, especially some of the processes that will be allowed for them to rebuild a life out of trafficking, that they use that word survivor instead of victim. And I would just wanted to ensure that the task force, if they choose to use that word survivor, that they would not be required to use victim. But as you said earlier, Assemblywoman Krasner, you will leave that up to the task force to determine issues like that. Is that correct?
Yes, through you, Chair Flores, to Assemblywoman Considine. Yes, that's correct. Much of this legislation is modeled after federal legislation that deals specifically with statewide human trafficking task forces. Currently, there are 26 states, including Guam, who have enacted statewide legislation regarding a human trafficking task force on a statewide level. So I know what you're saying. They are in fact survivors, and that's so important. And maybe when the task force is enacting their provisions, they can put that in. But just for the purposes of the bill, that is the language that is prescribed. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you, Assemblywoman. That does answer my question. I just wanted to make sure that survivor will be the word that if someone identifies as survivor, that's what they will be able to use.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Next, if we can go to Vice Chair Torres.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Assemblywoman, for the presentation. I appreciate it. It's always great to see you in the Government Affairs Committee. My question, I do apologize if you answered this early on in the presentation. I jumped from another hearing to this one, but I have a question regarding the amendment. I know that we're designating the human trafficking specialist within the Nevada Victims of Crime Compensation Program, and the Legislative Council's Digest clarifies that that would be under VOCA. I just want to confirm that it's going to be under VOCA and not VAWA.
Thank you for your question, Assemblywoman Torres. Yes, that provision was actually put in there by Ross Armstrong, who is the Director of Child and Family Services under the Nevada Department of Health and Human Services. And again, that was another piece that would allow us to get to a zero fiscal note, and it is VOCA, yes.
Okay, thank you. And I don't know if he happens to be on the call or not, or perhaps I'll be testifying later. I just want some clarification whether or not that's VOCA or VAWA, that office, and whether or not that would be taking any of the VOCA or VAWA funds that are currently being used, if that would reallocate them, or if that's differently funded and wouldn't impact the allocation of those dollars. That's my only concern as with the legislation, but I do really appreciate the intent. But I'm hoping we can get some clarity on that position, because it would add obviously additional responsibilities to an individual within that office. So I'm just wondering if we can get some guidance on that.
And before we answer that question, just for the purposes of minutes and clarity, the Vice Chair has used the phrasing of VAWA which is just Violence Against Women Act. And just for the purposes of minutes, I want that to be clear. And I know our staff in the back, sometimes we drop a bunch of different phrases and we don't give clarity. So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you, Vice Chair. Assemblywoman Krasner, I don't know if you'd like to go to Mr. Dold or
I think you're unmuted, Assemblywoman.
It's the Victims of Crime Compensation Program. It is VOCA. And my understanding through researching what other states are doing under the federal program is that there are specific dollars that are only available to statewide human trafficking task forces. So my understanding that those are the dollars that our state would like to go after, is the ones that are available exclusively to statewide human trafficking task forces. But again, Mr. Armstrong is on the call, and he is planning on testifying, so he can further clarify that. Thank you.
and thank you, Assemblywoman. Next, I'd like to go to Assemblywoman Black.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the presentation and for bringing this bill. I was curious, first, do you know how many victims of human trafficking there are in Nevada, roughly?
Well, you know, trying to tell you exactly how many victims there are would probably be only based on those that were identified by law enforcement and picked up by law enforcement and given services. I'm guessing that for every one that's picked up, there's probably 9 more that weren't picked up and weren't identified, and that's the problem.
Okay, well, I'm just curious, maybe you can follow up, and just the ones that we've identified, obviously, the ones that we haven't identified, there's no way to know that. I have a follow-up, not a follow-up, but another question, Mr. Chair, if you'd allow it.
Please follow up.
I'm curious, is there a way to attach a fine to this for the perpetrators so that we can help fund the program and offset some of the costs?
So I did, in my comments, I'm just going back to those. In Nevada, sex trafficking is at a rate of 89%. The national average of sex trafficking victims is 70%. So that's almost like 19% higher than the national average here in Nevada. Second question, I believe there's already legislation that does put a crime on the John or the pimp who is forcing this person into sex trafficking.
Right, I'm sure. I'm just wondering if there's a way to add a small additional fine to help fund the program. I think it's a good program, but thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yep.
Oh, sorry. May I also respond to the Assemblywoman Black's question?
Please do. Please state your name for the record.
Absolutely. James Dold from Human Rights for Kids, again for the record. Assemblywoman Black, so there is some anecdotal data that might be helpful to answering your question. The organization I previously worked at, Polaris Project, actually runs the National Human Trafficking Resource Center hotline for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. It's the largest victim-centered hotline in the nation. And in 2019, they received over 443 calls where they identified victims of human trafficking, specifically in Nevada, which comprised both labor and sex trafficking. It included both children as well as adults. It's not comprehensive in scope, again, because it's calls that come into the hotline, specifically where there have either been victims calling in seeking assistance, or where there's high indicators of a trafficking situation where victims have been identified and then that information has been relayed to law enforcement. I'll also note that last year, following up on what Assemblywoman Krasner had mentioned, that there were 8 successful prosecutions by the U.S. attorney alone at the federal level. And so, it kind of gives us a little bit of a glimpse, but one of the key problems of this issue is that it's a hidden crime. Like in my situation, I wasn't identified by law enforcement or anybody until I was much older and comfortable coming forward, in part because I was sort of hidden away in a house performing these labor and services. And so that's one of the other key problems with this is it's so hidden. But what we know is every year the National Human Trafficking Resource Center hotline receives more and more calls where they've identified survivors specifically from Nevada. And, as more word gets out, as more awareness gets created, the more victims that have been identified. But that's just a few numbers to answer your question.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Great. Members, any additional questions? Please feel free to unmute yourself and state your name for the record. Seeing no additional questions at this time, I'd like to invite those wishing to speak in support of Assembly Bill 143 to please, before I go to the phones, broadcast, do we have anybody on video that was going to be testifying in support? I don't believe we do, but please clarify if I'm incorrect. No, correct? Sounds good. Broadcast, if we could please go to those wishing to testify in support of Assembly Bill 143 to the phones, please.
To testify in support of Assembly Bill 143, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 611, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chairman Flores and members of the Assembly Government Affairs Committee. This is John Piro, John Piro, from the Clark County Public Defender's Office, testifying for both myself and Ms. Birchie from the Washoe County Public Defender's Office. We want to thank Assemblywoman Krasner for bringing this bill forward, and Mr. Dold, whom I consider a personal friend, for sharing his story with this committee. Oftentimes, legislation addresses things in the criminal legal system. However, solely addressing penalties on perpetrators leaves victims in the cold. This legislation is going to bring victims the services that they need. And we are fully standing behind giving victim services because oftentimes statistics show that people who are victimized become victimizers later on in life. And we are all about breaking the cycle at the Public Defender's Office. So thank you for bringing this legislation forward and working so hard on it. I know Assemblywoman Krasner has been working hard on these issues for as long as I've been appearing at the legislature, so we appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That concludes my testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Puro. And it was my understanding that Mr. Ellison, he wanted to take you up on the offer of borrowing that film from you.
You bet.
Great. Broadcast, if we could please go to the next caller wishing to testify in support of Assembly Bill 143.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 000, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last 3 digits of 000, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes.
Hello, my name is Jessica Adair, last name Adair, and I serve as the Chief of Staff in the Nevada Attorney General's Office. On behalf of Attorney General Ford, we wholeheartedly support this bill and thank Assemblywoman Krasner for sponsoring this important legislation. This bill complements our existing plans to facilitate a statewide response for human trafficking enforcement and supportive services. We look forward to continuing to work with the legislature, state, local, and federal governments, and community stakeholders to invest in services for survivors. Thank you.
And thank you for your testimony. If we could go to the next caller wishing to testify in support of Assembly Bill 143.
Caller with the last three digits of 825. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning. My name is Nicole Riley. NicoleReilly. I am the Ombudsman for Domestic Violence, Sexual Assault, and Human Trafficking at the Nevada Office of the Attorney General. First, I want to say thank you so very much to Assemblywoman Krasner and Mr. Doles for their powerful testimony. I am here to testify in support of AB 143 as it will aid in the flow of information across the state and assist the development of statewide best practices in responding to human trafficking as a whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If we could please go to the next caller wishing to testify in support of Assembly Bill 143.
Caller with the last three digits of 137. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Yes, hello. My name is Melissa Brudo. Last name Broudo. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak, and I thank you all for your consideration on this critical matter. And it was also really an honor to hear my friend James Dold, who I also consider to be a friend, speak. I'm an attorney and longtime advocate for all people in the sex trade, including survivors of human trafficking. I really think that the Nevada bill is so thoughtful in its creation around, family reunification, support for employment, and any other services that survivors might need. As pointed out by the man from the Public Defender's Office, it is so important that people, rather than being criminalized, are given the proper support. And what I have seen representing survivors of human trafficking in appellate defense here, I live in New York City, it is so often that they have to deal with the ramifications of a criminal record rather than receive support as survivers. So I want to thank you and encourage members of the community, survivors of human trafficking, as well as the members of the sex industry more generally, to be included in this study commission. Thank you so much.
And thank you for your testimony. I'd like to invite the next caller wishing to speak in support of Assembly Bill 143.
Caller with the last three digits of 122. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chair Flores, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Katie Ryan, Kapieryan, and I'm the System Director of Nevada Government Relations for Dignity Health St. Rose Dominican, and I'm also a member of the Nevada Policy Council on Human Trafficking. I have provided a letter of support to the committee on behalf of St. Rose, and I just wanted to also thank Assemblywoman Krasner for bringing this bill back for another session. As you've heard today in the testimony, all Nevadans deserve to live a life free of violence, exploitation, and slavery. Thank you, and I'm available to answer any questions.
And thank you for your testimony this morning. If we could please go to the next caller wishing to speak in support of Assembly Bill 143.
Caller with the last three digits of 040. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Kim Yeager, Yaeger. Good morning, Chair Flores and members of the committee. I am Kim Yeager, and I'm representing the Nevada Trucking Association and Truckers Against Trafficking. We've been focused on this issue for well over 9 years, beginning with Attorney General Cortez Masto when she was in office. We adopted Truckers Against Trafficking and did a complete rural road trip introducing the training materials that Truckers Against Trafficking offered. We are still committed to combat this horrific crime, and we do so by providing training for over 1 million truck drivers to date on how to recognize and to report the the signs of human and sex trafficking. We have been committed to support Awaken and supporting our survivors for Nevada. We have also contributed to training for over 120 Nevada law enforcement officers and over 160 employers from Nevada's casinos and RTC. Thank you so much for your time, and we are in full support of AB 143.
Thank you for your testimony. If we could go to the next caller wishing to speak in support of Assembly Bill 143.
For the new callers, to testify in support of Assembly Bill 143, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. And caller with the last 3 digits of 199, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning. I hope you can all hear me now. Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Tess Opferman. That's spelled Opferman, speaking on behalf of the Nevada Women's Lobby. It is a top priority of the Nevada Women's Lobby to support legislation that protects those who are survivors of domestic and sexual violence, including survivors of human trafficking. In Nevada, where we are ranked 9th in the nation for the number of cases of human trafficking, it is critical that we come up with plans to help these survivors access health care, child care, education, job security, and more. And that starts with legislation like AB 143. We need to fortify the safety net we have in place, and this is a strong step in that direction. Thank you so much to Assemblywoman Krasner for bringing this bill forward and for the powerful testimony presented. The Nevada Women's Lobby urges you to pass this bill, and we thank you for your time.
And thank you. If we could please go to the next caller wishing to speak in support of Assembly Bill 143.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 047, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chair Flores and members of the committee. My name is Lauren Boytel, LAURENBOITEL. I'm the Executive Director of Impact NV, and I chair the Nevada Policy Council on Human Trafficking, which is a diverse cross-section of community leaders and survivors from the public, private, and NGO sectors who come together to pursue collaborative, long-term systemic strategies to decrease sex trafficking in our state. On behalf of the Council, we would like to formally support the amended version of AB 143. We feel a statewide task force and central resource hub on the DHHS site will allow for much better coordinated efforts of sharing information and providing resources to victims through a collective framework that will not only break down regional silos, but also improve our grant competitiveness and increase the much needed potential funds Nevada receives for victim and survivor support. Nevada has shown great leadership in improving state laws to better protect and support trafficking victims. In fact, Shared Hope International named us the most improved state in 2019. However, as Assemblywoman Krasner mentioned, the DOJ reported more Nevada human trafficking cases filed in 2020 than in any previous year. We need to continue this meaningful progress, and we feel that AB 143 is an important step to this end. Thank you.
And thank you for your testimony. If we could go to the next caller wishing to speak in support of Assembly Bill 143.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 768, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Chairman Flores and members of the committee. My name is Jeff Blom, JESSBLOM, and I'm the Chief Investigations and Security Officer for Love Justice International. It's a non-government organization that conducts counter-human trafficking program work domestically and in 18 countries around the world. Human trafficking, as we all know, is an egregious crime against another individual and is unique from nearly all other crimes in that the victim is continuously victimized by the trafficker and exploiters over and over again. As an expert on the subject of human trafficking,
working for the past 15 years in this sector, overseas and domestically, and before that serving 20 years in law enforcement, I have seen firsthand the effects human trafficking has on the survivors and the need for a coordinated effort to combat it. AB 143 provides the three essential elements to a holistic, victim-focused approach to countering human trafficking: prevention, protection, and prosecution. Prevention to the development of awareness of HT, detection and identification, training of professional victims for law enforcement, and support programs available for survivors. Protection to the development of a victim services plan, providing assistance to survivors of human trafficking through governmental benefits, which can facilitate their recovery and begin the process of healing and trust building, which is the first step to gaining cooperation in the prosecution of their traffickers. And finally, prosecution will be approved through the statewide task force, which promotes information sharing among stakeholders, multi-jurisdictional case cooperation, and interagency collaboration, as human trafficking often crosses jurisdictional boundaries. The biggest challenges I have personally experienced is the difficulty of detecting and identifying potential victims of trafficking, followed by building trust and cooperation from the survivors to assist in prosecution of their traffickers. AB 143 will implement critical components that can help overcome these challenges through a coordinated effort and victim services plan. Love Justice International supports AB 143, and I urge the Assembly to support AB 143. Thank you, Chairman Flores and the committee members, for the time to address you.
And thank you for your testimony. We could go to the next caller wishing to speak in support of Assembly Bill 143.
To testify in support of Assembly Bill 143, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no more callers in support at this time.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to invite those wishing to speak in opposition to Assembly Bill 143.
To testify in opposition on Assembly Bill 143, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Call-in user 1. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hello, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. This is Chuck Calloway, Police Director with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. My last name is spelled C-A-L-L-A-W-A-Y. We are in support of the intent of this bill, and I thank Assemblywoman Krasner for her dialogue and conversation. But unfortunately, based on rules of committee, we are opposed at this time to AB 143. As many of you might know, approximately 80% of human traffic cases are in the Clark County area, and Clark County has had a very successful human trafficking task force for quite a long time now, and the North also has a very successful human trafficking task force. There is currently very good communication that takes place between the two task forces. Our concern is, number one, the bill does not designate who the members would be of a state task force or what the makeup of that task force would be, and also resources that are vital to the local task forces could potentially be diverted to a state task force, which is a concern that the vice chair had raised, and we share that same concern. Clark County has very unique challenges that may not be the same in other parts of the state. And our fear is that a state task force could create red tape or bureaucracy that could actually make it more difficult for victims in our area to get the resources that they need. And so we are in support of the intent, but unfortunately opposed to the bill. And we look forward to working with Assemblywoman Krasner to hopefully improve upon it. Thank you.
And thank you. If we could please go to the next caller wishing to speak in opposition to Assembly Bill 143.
Chair, there are no more callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to invite those wishing to speak in the neutral position for Assembly Bill 143.
To testify as neutral on Assembly Bill 143, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in neutral at this time.
Thank you. Assemblywoman Krasner, any closing remarks you may have?
No, thank you, Chair.
Great. With that, I want to again thank you for taking on this task. I trust you'll work with a lot of folk in the committee who may have additional questions, and with Mr. Callaway. Again, to Mr. Dole, thank you for coming out and really empowering folk through your story. And we appreciate you being here this morning with us. Please let us know when we can be of service to you. We're here to help. With that, I'd like to close out the hearing on Assembly Bill 143. And next, I'd like to invite Assemblywoman Bilbrey Axelrod to present Assembly Bill 153. Good morning and welcome, Assemblywoman.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Chair Flores and Government Affairs Committee. I am excited to be here. I had the pleasure of serving 2 terms on Government Affairs, so it's nice to be back in this committee where I feel very much at home. For the record, I am Assemblywoman Shannon Bilbrey Axelrod, representing Assembly District 34. I am here to present Assembly Bill 153, which revises provisions governing performance contracts. Assembly Bill 153 clarifies that the use of any savings realized through the use of performance contracts at the local level and encourages the use of performance contracts at the state level. You might be asking, what is a performance contract? Performance contracting is an alternative funding source, a way to make operating cost savings improvements now without tapping into capital budgets. The resulting cost savings pays for a project over time. The agency benefits immediately, getting new equipment, expertise from energy service professionals, ongoing maintenance services, and the ability to accomplish many projects all at once. How it works. A using agency enters to an agreement with an energy service company. I will refer to those as ESCOs. The ESCO will identify and evaluate savings opportunities and then recommend a package of improvements to be paid for through utility and operational savings. Many types of building improvements can be funded through existing budgets. New lighting technologies, boilers and chillers, energy management controls, landscaping, irrigation systems, trash compaction, just to name a few. Performance contracting allows agencies to make the facility upgrades now with no upfront capital and pay over time through the utility and operational savings that are a result. While contract payments occur during the useful life of the assets, if the savings aren't available to make payments over time, then the benefit of the performance contract is reduced. The ongoing benefits of the project don't change, so the company performing the work isn't hurt, but the agency is not getting the full benefit of the performance contract. AB 153 essentially allows the savings to be put back into the payment of the cost savings project. Finally, I wanted to let the committee know that we are continuing to work with LCB on potential clarifying language for a friendly amendment. The goal would be to clarify permissible uses of state-level ESPC savings specific to financing costs. LCB has been very responsive, but very overwhelmed, as you know, and we appreciate working with them, engaging to make this bill perfect. Well, maybe not perfect, but really good. This concludes my introductory comments, and with your approval, Chair, I would now like to turn over my testimony, the rest of the testimony, to Timothy Farkas to give some additional testimony. Thank you so much.
Perfect, thank you. Good morning and welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Flores, and thank you, of course, Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod. My name is Tim Farkas. That's Farkas. I'm the finance director for a company that works within these statutes. These statutes have been on the books for about 15 years. We have gotten feedback from local governments and so forth that we really should do something to tighten up this language a little. And so this really is a clarifying bill for both statutes. 332 pertains to local governments, including school districts. 333A pertains to state agencies. And so as Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod very clearly spelled out, the benefits occur over time. And so those benefits should be available to make sure that they're there for the payments that occur over time. And that's the whole premise, is a budget neutral way to get energy efficiency and renewable energy projects done. Also, all of our projects are what you might call green energy and are very much a target of the new climate action plan by the governor, which was released December 1st. So this clarifying legislation will help state and local governmental agencies and entities comply with the new climate action plan. So with that, I'm happy to be available for any questions, and I thank the committee very much. Thank you.
And Chair Flores, if I may, I did also want to note that Senator Chris Brooks is also a primary joint sponsor on this bill. So just wanted to, who was also a member of the Government Affairs Committee a couple of sessions back. So we're happy to answer any questions.
Perfect. And is Senator Brooks also joining us today?
He is not. He is unfortunately, but strong supporter.
Understood. Perfect. So with that, members, I'd like to open it up for questions. I don't see any in the chat at this time, but if you could please let me know if you'd like to ask a question. We'll start off with Assemblywoman Black, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Assemblywoman, for bringing this bill. When I was on the City Council in Mesquite, this was something that we were working on doing. One of our departments, the Recreation Department, had actually had one of these studies done and did a whole bunch of things that saved the city a lot of money. So I think this is a great idea. I wish that we were able to incentivize our department heads some way in finding cost savings like this. I know that's probably done on a case-by-case basis in the municipalities, but I think this is a great idea, and thank you for bringing this bill.
Thank you.
If next, we can go to Assemblyman Ellison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Hey, I have a real small question. Now, this is going to be strictly for, just trying to get this on the record, strictly for municipalities like the cities, the counties, the school districts, and this kind of stuff. Is that correct?
Do you want to take
Yes, that's correct. Local governments and state agencies.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Next, we can go to Assemblyman Matthews.
You're on mute.
Assemblyman, I believe you're on mute. I don't know if it's just on my end, but I still cannot hear you.
I cannot hear him as well.
Okay. Well, how about we try coming back to you, Assemblyman Matthews, after another question, after you get that quick audio issue resolved. Members, any additional questions? Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Assemblywoman. I do appreciate it. I have a quick question. Have you reached out to local governments? I don't see that they've submitted any testimony, so I'm just wondering if you could tell me where local governments are with the legislation.
Everyone's been very supportive that I have talked to. I know that we have from the governor's office of energy, we have support from those folks. I've had many conversations with municipalities and local government. To be honest, I haven't really, knock on wood, got pushback from anyone. So I didn't really do a lot to get all the support that maybe I should have. So I apologize for that, but I have not been, like I said, no one has offered any pushback. Mr. Farkas, would you like to say anything else about that?
Yes, thank you again. For the record, Tim Farkas. We have support from local governments. If they don't speak today, we will provide letters from several local governments. I expect one or two to speak in support today.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
And Assemblyman Matthews, I do see that you are back on. Do you want to give it a try again? And I think we're still having the issue. Cindy, if I could ask that you help Assemblyman Matthews resolve that issue. And in the meantime, I'll come back to Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Assemblymember Bilbray Axelrod and Mr. Farkas for bringing this forward. It's pretty straightforward. I do have one small clarifying question on the term continually review. Is that a yearly review? Is that 6 months? Or is that like in preparation for the legislature? I realize that sometimes means different things to different departments. So I didn't know if you had an idea of what you were looking for with that continual review.
I'll give that one to you.
And thank you.
Thank you. Again, for the record, this is Tim Farkas. Thank you for that question. That is the language and that we're trying to kind of clarify. We would like for it to be a little more specific as well. And that's exactly what we're talking about with LCB. And again, they've been very helpful in this process. The reference will probably be to the legislative budget session at some point, because that is the point of continuing payments and benefits into multiple biennium. And so that will be clarified in the future version. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for that clarification. Seems to be the word of the day. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Assemblyman Matthews, are we in a better position with the audio? Not yet. Okay, members, any additional questions? Please feel free to unmute yourself and state your name for the record, members, if you'd like to ask a question. Seeing none, at this time, I'd like to go to the phones and invite those wishing to speak in support of Assembly Bill 153. I'd like to remind you to keep your remarks to 2 minutes, please. Broadcast, please.
To testify in support of Assembly Bill 153, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 094. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chair Flores and members of the Government Affairs Committee. My name is David Bobzien. Last name is spelled Bobzien, and I'm Director of the Governor's Office of Energy. Thank you for the opportunity to provide some comments in support of AB 153 this morning. Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod very elegantly described how performance contracting works, and Mr. Farkas properly noted that performance contracting is a component of Nevada's recently released state climate strategy. So our letter in support makes note of that connection to the state climate strategy. So here's a wonderful example of the legislature considering how to move forward with our climate goals. I would also like to note, and this is hopefully of use to each individual member as they're communicating with their home local governments, that the Governor's Office of Energy conducts a performance contracting audit assistance program where we provide assistance to local governments at the front end of the performance contracting journey, if you will, where we provide money to assist with the energy audit that happens at the outset of the program. So identifying the opportunities for energy savings that can allow local governments to kickstart their performance contracting experience. So with that, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for the opportunity to present in testimony in support of AB 153.
And thank you for joining us this morning. If we could go to the next caller wishing to speak in support of Assembly Bill 153.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 948. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chair Flores, members of the committee. For the record, David Cherry, spelled DAVIDCHERRY, and I'm Government Affairs Manager for the City of Henderson. The City of Henderson has used performance contracts to complete a street light bulb conversion from high-pressure sodium to induction lighting, which created a 40% cost savings. We've also used this tool to help pay for a trail lighting conversion, which has increased the longevity of the equipment used to illuminate our outside trails, helping us save on costs. And we're currently upgrading boilers and chillers at city facilities under a performance contract that will slash costs by increasing energy efficiency in heating and cooling. As a rule, when looking at performance contracts, they're only done when the city can create a positive ROI within the first 10 years. For these reasons, we support AB 153, and we thank the bill sponsor for bringing forward this legislation, which will help ensure this incentive for cost savings remains a valuable tool.
And thank you for your testimony this morning. If we can go to the next caller wishing to testify in support of Assembly Bill 153.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 155. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christy Cabrera, CHRISTI I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director for the Nevada Conservation League here in support of AB 153. Energy efficiency is the cheapest and fastest way to meet our growing energy demand while reducing the pollution that drives dangerous climate change and harms our health, because the cleanest energy source is the one that you don't have to produce in the first place. Energy efficiency is also critical to meeting our state's climate goals. Performance contracting is an opportunity for governments to make energy efficiency upgrades that reduce energy costs and the associated pollution. This bill will make it easier for governments to engage in these types of contracts. We urge your support on AB 153, and we thank you for your time.
And thank you for your testimony this morning. Hey, if we can go to the next caller wishing to speak in support of Assembly Bill 153.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 232. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is David Daslich with the Vegas Chamber, here today to testify in support of AB 153. We believe this clarifying language will encourage further use of these performance contracts. We believe that offering more opportunity for them is a good use of taxpayer money, and we urge a yes vote. Thank you.
Thank you. If we can go to the next caller wishing to speak in support of Assembly Bill 153.
Chair, there are no more callers in support at this time.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to invite those wishing to speak in opposition to Assembly Bill 153.
To testify in opposition of Assembly Bill 153, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in opposition at this time.
Perfect. And now I'd like to invite those wishing to speak in the neutral position for Assembly Bill 153.
To testify neutral on Assembly Bill 153, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no more callers in neutral at this time.
Thank you. Assemblywoman, if you could come back and any closing remarks you may have.
Thank you. I just would like to say thank you very much for hearing this bill today. As you see, it has a broad base of support, and I would just really appreciate your support on this bill. And thank you to all those who did call in support as well, and as well to Mr. Farkas. Thank you for having me.
Thank you again, Assemblywoman. I will, just to put Assemblyman Matthews' remarks on the record, we were having some technical audio issues, but he did want to express a thank you for your presentation and mention that he appreciates the bill and supports the measures to facilitate cost savings. And again, we'll be having issues like that all the time, and I'll try to get you on the record whenever we can. At this time, I'd like to open it up for public comment. Excuse me, I'll close out the hearing on Assembly Bill 153. And I'd like to next go to public comment broadcast.
To take your place in the public comment queue, please press star 9 now. Caller with the last 3 digits of 149. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last 3 digits of 149. Please slowly spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes.
This is Ross Armstrong for the record, ROSSARMSTRONG. I attempted to testify neutral during the hearing for Assemblywoman Krasner's bill related to victims in human trafficking. I just did want to thank the Assemblywoman for meeting with us and making some modifications that allowed us to, if as amended, would remove the fiscal note. The key to that was the change of language from mandatory tasks for that task force to discretionary or may, which allows us to build the system to which we have the capacity for right now. To answer the Vice Chairwoman's question about VOCA versus VAWA funds, I did want to confirm that it is VOCA funds. And that we're not creating a new position, but rather we'll provide specialized training to a member of our team already, so we won't be diverting any funds from victims to that operation. The bill represents an important step in terms of moving forward with a health response to the crisis of human trafficking now that we have the criminal justice response pretty well situated. So I will submit some additional comments to help explain any of the fiscal note changes and that difference between VOCA and VAWA and how this would look like for the division. And I thank the committee for its time.
And Madam Secretary, if we could let the record reflect that we will reopen the hearing on Assembly Bill 143 so that Mr. Armstrong's remarks can be placed on the record under the neutral position. And Mr. Ross Armstrong is the administrator of the Division of Child and Family Services, and he'll also be providing some additional written remarks. Thank you, Mr. Armstrong. I know we've been having technical difficulties all day, so I appreciate you finally being able to get in. So we briefly reopened the hearing on Assembly Bill 143 so we can get your remarks on the record, and we'll again close the hearing on Assembly Bill 143 and broadcast if we could continue on public comment.
Chair, the public line is open and working. There are no more callers at this time.
Great, thank you. At this time, we'll close out public comment. Members, thank you for your participation and thoughtful dialogue this morning. And we're grateful again to the presenters for bringing these important measures forward. I want to remind you tomorrow we're going to be having a presentation by the Las Vegas Metro Police Department. Mr. Calloway will be here. Be ready to ask some thoughtful questions and engage in some good dialogue there. Again, thank you for your work. This meeting's adjourned.